Hi guys! So here we have the second type of the multiple choice where we have just to choose one option for each question. So as you can see, we have 5 different questions and I need to choose one option only. The structure is going to be basically the same as the previous one in the video about type A. So I just want to make sure that you see that I will apply the same techniques and the same strategy regardless of the number of options that I have to choose in each question. So the first thing that we have to do is just go through the first question. And I'm going to read just the question and I'm going to highlight the most important keywords. So question 27, what point does Chester, so there is a Chester, making about Buzz book in the first paragraph? Those would be my keywords. And although I haven't read the text before, I could see that these are both names and it's going to be about a book. 28. How does Chester respond? So how Chester respond to the information in the book about tenements? I don't know what that is, but it's not really important at the moment, and maybe it's not important at all. They can tell me about it in the text, or I would just have to scan for that keyword regardless of the meaning. 29. What does Chester say about chapter 6 of the book? 30. What does Chester suggest? So it's going to be a recommendation or suggestion about the chapters focusing on the 1920s building. Boom. So it's quite a specific event. And question 31. What impresses Chester the most? So impress, impressive, impression. About the chapter on land values. So that's the very specific topic of that chapter. So it's going to be easy to find those kind of keywords. Right. So as you can see, the WH questions are very important to differentiate. It's not the same as how she responds as what she responds, right? I'd have to look at different pieces of information in order to figure out the right option. But for now, I'm just going to ignore the options and I'm going to begin with question 27. I'm going to read it again. Point does Chester make about Barr's book in the first paragraph? So I'm going to read the first paragraph very carefully and very slowly. And so if I do that good enough, I would be able to then see the options and the correct option would stand out. So let's read the whole thing. In building the skyline, Jason Barr, so that's one of my keywords, Jason Barr, takes the reader through a detailed history of New York City. The book combines geology, history, economics, and a lot of data to explain why business clusters developed where they did and how the early decisions of workers and firms shaped the skyline we see today. Building the skyline is organized into 2 distinct parts. The first is primarily historical and addresses New York's settlement and growth from 1609 to 1900. The second deals primarily with the 20th century and is a compilation of chapters commenting on different aspects of New York's urban development. The tone and organization of the book changes somewhat between the first and second parts, as the latter chapters incorporate aspects of Barr's related research papers. Okay, so let's take a minute to understand the whole point of that paragraph. and see if I'm able to remember the main idea of it. So as we can see, this Catherine Chester says that this guy takes the reader through a detailed history of New York, and it combines geology, history, economics, and a lot of data to explain why business clusters developed where they did and how these decisions of workers and firms shaped the skyline we see today. So if I have a look at the options, A, it gives a highly original explanation for urban development. B, elements of Barr's research papers are incorporating throughout the book. Actually, that is not true, right? Because here it says that is just the latter. It says that is just the latter chapters, not throughout. Other books that are available on the subject have taken a different approach. No. It covers a range of factors that affected the development of New York. So this one would be the correct option because a range of factors. We have geology, history, economics, and a lot of data to explain, what affected the development of New York. So that was the business clusters, how they developed the way they did, and how it shaped the skyline we see today. So now let's continue with question 28. How Chester responds to the information in the book about tenements. So I would have now to scan for the word tenements. So I'm going to scan very quickly without reading. Tenements, 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 and tenements. That's the first time that I have it. So now I know I would have to read and see if I can find anything about it. So let's see what chapter is this in. So this is chapter 3. And now it says both chapters. Okay, so I'm going to begin reading carefully from both chapters until the end. Both chapters are informative and well researched and set the stage for the economic analysis that comes later in the book. I would have liked Barr to expand upon his claim that existing tenements prevented skyscrapers in certain neighborhoods. Okay, so something that is how does shelter respond to the information? One important thing would be she would like the writer to actually explain a little bit more the fact that tenements prevented skyscrapers in certain neighborhoods because likely no skyscraper developer was interested in performing the necessary slum clearance. Later in the book, Ball makes the claim that the depth of bedrock was not a limiting factor for developers, as foundation costs were a small fraction of the cost of development. At first glance, it is not obvious why slum clearance would be limiting, while more expensive foundations would not. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the options and I'm going to see if anything stands out. A, she describes the reasons for Barr's interest. So actually not really. We don't know the interest on the tenements. She indicates a potential problem with Barr's analysis. Well, it could be a potential problem, something that she said he could have expanded more. She compares Barr's conclusion with that of other writers, so we don't have anything about other writers. She provides details about the sources Barr used for his research. Provides details? Not really. So I think it's more about the problem and the reason of his claim. No skyscraper developer was interested in performing the necessary slum clearance, and then later on makes the claim that the depth of bedrock was not a limiting factor for developers. It is not obvious why slum clearance would be limiting, and that's why she would have liked him to expand on that claim. To continue with question 29, what Chester says about chapter 6 of the book. So I need to scan for the words chapter 6. So chapter 4, 4, 5. Okay, and now I've got 7. So 6 should be in between. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from that point to the end very carefully, very slowly. Chapter 6 then presents data on building height throughout the 20th century and uses regression analysis to predict building construction. While less technical than the research paper on which the chapter is based, it is probably more technical than would be preferred by a general audience. So let's see the options. Let's have a look at the options. It contains conflicting data. Not really. It focuses too much on possible trends. Possible trends. Too much? Maybe not. It is too specialized for most readers, but actually, yes, I remember that they said that at the end. Yeah, it is probably more technical, so more specialized, that would be preferred by a general audience, so most readers. I'm going to say that question 29, the correct option would be C. So let's continue with question 30. What Chester suggests about the chapters focusing on the 1920s building boom. So once again, I'm going to scan the text looking for 1920s and then building boom. So scanning for the number because easier to find, like 1920s, you see? And the building boom. There you go. So now I'm gonna read slowly and carefully the whole paragraph so that I could understand most of the information from the very beginning. So, chapters 8 and 9 focus on the birth of Midtown and the building boom of the 1920s. Chapter 8 contains lengthy discussions of urban economic theory that may serve as a distraction to readers primarily interested in New York. However, they would be well suited for undergraduates learning about the economics of cities. In the next chapter, Barr considers two of the primary explanations for the building boom of the 1920s. Okay. The first, exuberance, and the second being financing. He uses data to assess the viability of these two explanations and finds that supply and demand factors explain much of the development of the 1920s. Though it enabled the boom, cheap credit was not, he argues, the primary cause. Okay, so he does suggests some things. So he's giving his opinion about this event, this phenomenon. Let's have a look at the options and see what stands out. So the information should have been organized differently. I don't think they mention anything about the organization. More facts are needed about the way construction was financed. So I think that is all clear about the way it was financed because basically he's explaining it. The explanation that is given for the building boom is unlikely. So we don't know if it is unlikely, possible, or impossible. Some parts will have limited appeal to certain people. Okay, so some parts, limited appeal to certain people. I would say so because they said something from the beginning. Let's see. Contains lengthy distraction to readers. Okay, so that may serve as a distraction to readers primarily interested in New York, and also they say they would be well suited for undergraduates learning about the economics of cities. So I think that's basically it. Because some parts are not interesting. For example, chapter 8 is not interesting for readers interested in just New York. Yeah. And also, they would be well suited for undergraduates learning about economics. So, for the rest of students or for the rest of readers, it wouldn't be very interesting or very appealing to them. I'm gonna say that the closest option, with some evidence in the text, would be option D, as she is basically given some kind of like subjective personal language to describe that chapter. And basically, because I can't find any proof for the other options, so I would say that's the one. Let's continue with question 31. What impresses Chester the most about the chapter on land values? So once again, I'm going to try to find land values. I'm going to scan the text looking for the keywords land values. So I was reading until the end, and I'm going to land values. If I couldn't find this keyword here, I would just go to the very beginning of the text, okay, and I would start scanning from the very beginning looking for land values. All right, so we found it just at the end, and I'm gonna read that in detail. In the final chapter, chapter 10, Barr discusses another of his empirical papers that estimates Manhattan land values from the mid-19th century to the present day. The data work that went into these estimations is particularly impressive. Right, this is a very important keyword, right? Because it is related with my question. Let's continue reading and see. Toward the end of the chapter, Barr assesses whether skyscrapers are a cause or an effect of high land values. He finds that changes in land values predict future building height, but the reverse is not true. So the book ends with an epilogue in which Barr discusses the impact of climate change on the city and makes policy suggestions for New York going forward. Okay, so what impresses Chester the most about the chapter of land values? Let's have a look at the options now. The broad time period that is covered. I don't think that she is impressed by the time period. It's just a fact. The interesting questions that Barr asks. Discusses, but not asks. The nature of the research into the topic. So, and the recommendations Barr makes for the future. So it's not really impressive, just the research, yeah? All the work, as we mentioned earlier, the data work that went into the estimation. So basically, the research into the topic, yeah, is particularly impressive. So I'm going to say that letter C is the best option. So that would be the end, and as you can see, I didn't have to read every single paragraph. I was just reading the ones that I scanned for the keywords of the questions. So I didn't waste any time reading everything that I didn't need to. The best strategy for the multiple choice is to scan looking for the keywords of the question, and then is just reading slowly and in detail so that you can remember what you're reading, you can understand better what you're reading. And if you do this second point with good quality, you saw that the options clearly stand out. This kind of multiple choice questions are fully into understanding the main ideas and the actual information. So it's not so much based on finding synonyms or connecting keywords and things like that. It's about a deeper understanding of the text. In order to succeed in the multiple choice kind of questions, we would definitely have to train and read more often and better. Okay, so that's all for me. I hope that this was useful and see you soon. Bye.